I'm Barbara Wysocki. I am president of the League of Women Voters. I'm very happy to welcome you to this program this evening, which has to do with, I think, a very fascinating topic, essentially the intersection of the justice system, largely the incarceration part of that, and the question of mental health. I think we've all heard over the last few months as discussion has evolved in our community about the need to accommodate those who find themselves in our jails because of medical issues, mostly mental, but not always. And we thought it would be appropriate for us to address this topic singularly, separating it from the other issues that have been part of this big discussion. Before I do that, though, I'm going to unabashedly make a plug for another program that the League of Women Voters is doing. As you know, in the last week or so, there has been a push to organize individuals in our community to advance the cause of a referendum dealing with redistricting. The League of Women Voters has supported this idea for years and years. We've not been Joni-come-latelys to this, but many feel that this is the time when we can really make a difference and see this goal realized. So in the back of the room, if you are interested, there are petitions that you can sign. There are also petitions that if you're interested in this cause, you can take with you and collect signatures, an instruction sheet, and some information. So there will be a lot more about this coming out over the next few weeks and months, and we're hoping that this can be a very successful venture for us in the League of Women Voters. I am going to turn the next part of this program over to Jerry Kirchner in a moment, but I do want to explain for everyone who saw some early promotions on this meeting that we do not have with us tonight as a speaker Deputy Sheriff Ellen Jones. As you know, the area of Gifford in Champaign County was visited by a tornado on Sunday. There is a lot of emergency work that needs to be done, cleanup work, and since Gifford does not have a police force of its own, the sheriff's office has really been doing yeoman's work in terms of providing some coordination of activities, as well as enforcing a curfew in light of the fact that there is severe destruction in that area. I did talk with the sheriff this morning. We are definitely going to reschedule Mr. Jones at another time yet in this year, but he is not with us this evening. But I do think we have three wonderful people who have been involved with this issue for some time. And I'm going to let Jerry Kirchner, who has been sort of the league point person on this issue, come forward and introduce our guests for us this evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Barb, and thank you to our speakers this evening for coming. First, we have Peter Tracy. Peter Tracy is the Executive Director of the Champaign County Mental Health Board and the Champaign County Developmental Disabilities Board. Previously, he was employed with the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS, where he was the statewide administrator of the Office of Mental Health Services and the Medicaid Community Mental Health Services Program, as well as serving as Deputy Chief of Staff. Mr. Tracy also served as the statewide manager of grants and special programs with the Illinois Department of Mental Health and Developmental Disabilities. Sheila Ferguson is here with us this evening. Sheila has worked at Community Elements for over 23 years and has been Chief Executive Officer since 2005. Ms. Ferguson has a master's degree in social work from the University of Illinois and is a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Illinois. Under her leadership, Community Elements has expanded behavioral health services and programs and has initiated strong collaborations and partnerships with other providers. The strategic goals of Community Elements are focused on community wellness and the integration of mental health, substance use, and physical health services. And we're very pleased that Brian Barnard could join us at the last minute this evening. Brian is presently a consultant at Community Elements. He has 35 years of experience in substance abuse treatment, mental health treatment, community corrections, and program development. Mr. Barnard's experience includes employment as the facility director for a Federal Bureau of Prisons halfway house, the associate director at Prairie Center for Substance Abuse, and the director of adult recovery services at Community Elements. He is currently on the faculty of Eastern Illinois University, and I'd like to welcome all three of our panel this evening. Thank you.
Well, again, I'm Peter Tracy, Champaign County Mental Health Board and Developmental Disability Board. Good evening, everyone. Glad to be here. I would like to recognize two board members of my board. Dr. Ernie Gullerud, who is in the audience here, is a current member of the Mental Health Board, and then Jan Anderson is a previous member of the Mental Health Board. So if you have any problems with any policies or decisions that we've made in the past, please blame them, not me. This story goes back. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview, and then you'll hear more specifics from Sheila and Bruce. But the story begins in October of 2012 when the Champaign County Board made the decision to contract with a company called ILPP to take a look at the justice system and the jail situation in Champaign County. The lead investigator on that for that company was a gentleman named Kalmanoff, Dr. Kalmanoff. And I had my first experience with Dr. Kalmanoff the contract was signed in October. In February of 2013, we had two meetings with Dr. Kalmanoff. He wanted to meet the mental health providers as well as the Mental Health Authority in Champaign County. And then he was planning to come and did come to a meeting of the Champaign County Mental Health Board. The meeting that we had in the first meeting with the mental health providers was probably one of the more unpleasant meetings that I've been at in my career. And as I was introduced, you saw that I was with the Department of Children and Family Services, so I've been to a lot of unpleasant meetings over the years. But this particular meeting was unpleasant primarily because Dr. Kalmanoff identified serious deficiencies in our system. And I think that for the most part, the Mental Health Board had been focused more on juvenile issues and we've spent a lot of time developing programs for kids mostly because for the most part, the state of Illinois doesn't have a children's mental health system. That's my opinion. Basically, there's one statewide program for children's mental health, and that is the SAS program, which is a program that is designed to screen kids for high-end mental health services, but pretty much everything else is discretionary. It's not statewide programs, and that's not to say that Community Elements as a provider doesn't provide services, but it's been by their choice. It isn't really the direction of the state. And so there's a lot of gaps in that system. On the adult side, we had been primarily focused on the specialty courts. We provided a lot of support for drug court, and then when they developed a mental health court and then backed out of the mental health court, we supported those efforts. And those indirectly impact on the jail because if you do good things with the people that are involved in the specialty courts, you hopefully keep them from reoffending and coming back into the jail. But primarily what Dr. Kalmanoff pointed out to us was that we did not have a system that, when people got into the jail, linked them back to services when they left the jail, nor did we have a system that really adequately did anything to deflect people with mental illness from going into the jail. And at the Mental Health Board meeting that evening in February of this year, he pretty well trashed the poor person, your staff member who came, basically pointing out that we were not effectively dealing with this population. As a result of those meetings, the Mental Health Board, I had several meetings with the leadership of the Mental Health Board, and we decided that we needed to take immediate action. And I had a conversation with Sheila, and she agreed we needed to take immediate action, and also Bruce Swardini from Prairie Center, as well as some other people, other providers. And so in early March, we began to make immediate changes in the contracts that we had with these agencies. And Sheila immediately implemented some programming in the jail, and we began to work to meet with the sheriff, as well as Alan Jones, the deputy, to talk about what we needed to do, because we were also, at that time, our contract cycles run the same as the state of Illinois. So we go from July 1 to June 30. So at that time, this was in February and March, we were winding down the FY13 contract year, and we were also in the middle of the application process for actually the FY14 applications were already in. So at that time, in discussing the problem with my board, we made the decision that it was too late to do really anything. We couldn't ask them to redo their applications, which had already been submitted. So we essentially made the decision that we were going to move ahead and give them the contracts that they currently had, and we were also going to add money, about $100,000 to Community Elements, and we were going to essentially give them those awards with the understanding that they would work with us to reconfigure the contracts so that we could effectively deal with the issues of how do you get people that are in the jail to get services and to be linked to services when they leave the jail, and also how can we do a better job of deflecting people with mental illnesses from coming into the jail. And at that time, so that led to a series of meetings. We had actually 2 meetings that I was involved with and my staff were involved with, and we laid out some parameters of things that we wanted to see. And there were basically 9 areas that we wanted to hit on. The first was, we felt it would be very important to develop a system to monitor and track people coming into the jail. And there is a system that's called Data Link that was in the process of being implemented, but we decided that we needed to make sure that Sheila and the other providers needed to be aware when people were admitted were incarcerated. The second thing we needed was a protocol for defining how people would be linked and engaged upon release from the jail. And so that was another thing that we wanted to include in this package. The third area was that we wanted to ensure that people with behavioral health and criminal justice involvement were connected or reconnected to benefits and supports, Medicaid, for example, SSI. There has been a serious problem, and I think that this has been corrected, but if a person is on Medicaid and receives services and then is incarcerated, the Medicaid is suspended. And so people then have to go through a reapplication process. Now, I think that that's changed at this point. And so at this time, when people go in, they don't lose their benefits, but we wanted also to make sure that we had a system that if a person didn't have benefits and was eligible, that we could get them connected to benefits. And that's something that Sheila and her organization does very well. We also wanted to make sure that we had staff assigned to work in the jail and to also collaborate with the mental health provider that's in the jail, which is a company or an organization that's called Correctional Healthcare Companies. And they are the ones that the sheriff contracts with for mental health and psychiatric services in the jail. And we needed to build a connection between the community agencies and this agency that works in the jail. We also wanted to make sure there were some very good things that Sheila and her staff were doing. One of them is called MRT, and they're going to tell you more about that. But and I actually have forgotten what MRT stands for. Moral recognition. Moral recognition therapy, and it's an evidence-based. We looked up. Try looking up recognition and see if you find it in the dictionary. You won't. But anyway, they had already begun that process, and we wanted that to happen both in the jail for the people that were in the jail, but also for people that were at risk of becoming involved in the justice system. On the other side, those are for people that were in the jail. We also wanted to develop a system that deflected people or identified people and kept them out of the jail and got them back linked to services. And there was one thing that we talked about during the conversations with the sheriff and with Sheila and other providers, and that was the people that are referred to as high flyers or frequent flyers. The most recent term I heard at the meeting last week was super users. And these are people that cycle in and out of the jail, have serious mental health issues, but disengaged from treatment. They're very difficult to keep them in treatment. And one of the ideas that we were talking about at that time was that perhaps we needed to do intensive case management with that group in an effort to kind of keep them functioning as well as possible. And you're going to hear a little bit later about something that is called a RAP plan, which RAP stands for Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And if you're familiar with the concept of the advance directive, the medical advance directive, the concept here is that if you have people that have these needs, what you do is when they're doing fairly well, you talk with them and develop a plan about what happens the next time there is a meltdown or they get connected to the system. And so the idea there was that we would develop RAP plans for these people, and so that when they pop up on the radar, if they get disengaged, that when they show up, people know what the plan is. You know, they don't have to reassess them. We have a plan, and this is a plan that theoretically the folks have bought into. So that was another area, this intensive RAP. We also wanted to, and this is kind of a subgroup of that, but target the homeless people with significant law enforcement and also mental health issues and recidivism. And then the last area was that we wanted to work with the sheriff to do crisis intervention training for police officers. And that was, and also mental health first aid was another thing that we were talking about doing at that time. So this was sort of what was decided that we kind of wanted to have to address those two major areas. After a couple meetings with us, Sheila and the other providers went off with the sheriff and Alan Jones, primarily Alan Jones, I think was the major one. And the agreement that we had was, or what we told, the agreement we had with Sheila and Alan Jones was, that we would not issue contracts until the law enforcement and the sheriff was in agreement with that what we were going to be doing was going to be something that they wanted to see done and that would be helpful. And I have never in my time here in Champaign County seen the wonderful collaboration like that I saw between Sheila and Bruce and also the folks at in the sheriff's department. And they worked very hard. They created memoranda of understandings between the sheriff and these providers, but they also came up with new contracts. We reconfigured the contracts. And the handout that I left for you really identifies the contracts that the Mental Health Board has and gives you some information. And I'm not, if you start on, the first one is the contract, the title of it is Criminal Justice and Problem Solving Courts Program. It's $149,000. This is the one that puts a staff member in the jail. You can see the models that are listed, the moral recognition therapy, the seeking safety, the RAP plans, the training in data link. The next contract on the second page is Criminal Justice Integrated Behavioral Health Program, and that is an $83,000 contract, which was increased by $35,000 over the previous year. And this provides a variety of services for people that are in the jail. The crisis, the next contract, we funded that $229,000, which was about a $40,000 increase over the previous year. This is one that the idea was that these crisis workers would actually be out there trying to deflect people from jail when they had law enforcement contacts. This was also to work with the Community Resource Center at Presence Hospital. And as you can see, this program funds 2 new crisis clinicians. I think we're in process on that. I don't know if this has gotten going yet. The Time Center, we added additional money to Time Center to get the MRT services there, as well as to beef up our drug and mental health screening. Prairie Center Drug Court, we provide $178,000 worth of funding for Prairie Center to provide services at the drug court and manage that process. Prairie Center, we have a $10,000 contract with them, which was redirected from when the mental health court shut down. And the idea was this would give them some additional capacity to provide assessments in the jail. And then the last one is Francis Nelson, and this was originally one of our target areas for funding last year was wellness for people with disabilities. And there's a SAMHSA program that's called 10 by 10, and the idea was of this program was to address some of the issues that cause people with mental illnesses, serious mental illnesses, to have a life expectancy of about 50 years compared to the general population, which is 75 or 76 years. So the idea is to raise the life expectancy by 10. So we had that as one of the areas, and Francis Nelson submitted a proposal, and we didn't fund it originally, but they said, we would like to try to do something with the jail to look at integrated services as well as some wellness things for the people that are involved with the jail, our target population. And so we did fund that $36,000, and that program is now underway, and there's a memorandum of understanding between the sheriff and this agency. So with that gives you a little bit of the background. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Sheila Ferguson, who will give you a little bit more detail about how this is working. Whoops. This is the technical.
It's the technical part. Let's see.
That's the television.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Kind of work around the speakers a little bit here. Thanks for having me tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to come talk about this topic. And also, in doing so, I also wanted to give kind of an update of community elements. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, I kind of want to start there and then go straight into the programs and services and have a little bit more time for questions and answers. So today we present a PowerPoint, which is a handout for you. And it'll allow us to talk a little bit about community elements, as I said. So also what you picked up was a brochure of ours, which is the basic brochure that we use to explain community elements to people who aren't familiar with us. but I also see a lot of familiar faces in the audience, and I know that you may have a lot of knowledge already, so I'll try to be brief about it. Community Elements has been around since 1956, and in doing so has really created a wide range or continuum of services for people in Champaign County and surrounding counties. We actually serve not only Champaign County, but Ford, Iroquois, Vermilion, and a little bit even further than that as we're needed. But the mission of the agency has changed over that time. We started out in a little house on State Street with 9 employees, and we're now 167 employees strong and have 11 facilities, a lot of residential programs, which you'll see really do play an important part in helping people, especially those who are involved with the criminal justice system, stay in the community. So our mission is wide and broad, and our services include a large range of behavioral health, prevention, and treatment services, which you might be familiar with, but the ones I wanted to pay a little bit more attention to is the fact that we don't serve just adults or just children. We really do serve people from the beginning of life through the end of life. And so, as you know, the curve for certainly the over 65 is growing for us, with baby boomers moving also through that. We're actually seeing an increase in need for people for specific services for those age ranges. And they come in a lot of times not just mental health treatment, but substance abuse treatment, and also not just treatment, but also prevention services and intervention that could be short term. So for young women who are homeless, who are pregnant or parenting, we'll serve and help them move to self-sufficiency if that's appropriate, or reunification with their families if that's appropriate. So I did want to mention that there's a whole range, and so this is a segment of the population we're talking about tonight, but it's a population we're well aware of because not all the people who ends up touching the criminal justice system are single men. So we have women, children are involved, families, the community in some way, and not everyone who touches the criminal justice system needs intervention or treatment. Sometimes they just need help with housing and some supports and maybe perhaps employment. So there's a lot of reasons for people touching the system, but I wanted to point out that I know we're talking about a select population, and there is some statistics that we'll talk about which demonstrate that we do have to have a bit different focus, a lot of people with mental health and substance abuse issues. So for us, the services that we wanted to touch on was a lot of our residential programs, and specifically what we're offering in the jail. So one of the slides talks about involuntary treatment, psychiatric care in our respite center, for example. We also operate Time Center, which is a large shelter, 70 beds for men, 50 on a dorm or PADS program, and another 20 in a transitional level 2 program, all in the same facility. And I want to note that we'll talk a little bit about capacity for Champaign County to be able to help everyone too tonight, because Time Center, this time of year, we experience a little bit of cold, but people don't realize, and sometimes it's nice to have an opportunity to say this, is Time Center is almost full today. And so that's 70 beds, and that's just men, and that's just the ones we are helping in Time Center. Some of which who've touched the criminal justice system, and we're helping in that way as well. We also have a range of independent apartments, and then we have also prevention services, not just, again, for adults, but we own and operate the Roundhouse, which is a runaway homeless youth shelter. And so that's a really important part of the continuum we have. And we don't do it alone. We get a lot of help from a lot of people, a lot from the cities, a lot from the county, from the state, and even from the federal government. So we have a very large range of funders that help us do that. So mentioning that we're not alone, we thought this slide was really helpful on the front page. It's an overview from the Bureau of Justice in 2006. And the Bureau of Justice found that many people who were in the justice system as a whole were or did have current symptoms, recent history, or had a significant mental health condition. And so you can see how it looks for us on the state, federal level, but also how it looks for us on the local level. We did see an increase in recidivism amongst people who had mental health diagnoses or illnesses. And we saw an increase, of course, in some problems that we know are systemic related to that, which have to do with homelessness, lack of a safe and stable place to live. And the basis for our mission is really, if people don't have a safe and stable place to live and their basic resources met, it's very difficult to work on any other issue. So, again, thank you very much for having me. I am going to turn it over to Bruce. And Bruce is going to talk about how we moved from where our mission was, specifically to the programs and services that we offer in the jail. And today we also were fortunate enough, Celeste Blodgett is in the audience as well, and Celeste has worked alongside Bruce and myself and the Sheriff's Office and everyone else who's been involved, 708 and so on, even the police chiefs of both cities, to make sure that what we were going to work on was going to be something that was embraced by everyone. We understood why we were doing it, and we have a long way to go. So the message is, yes, we're doing a lot. We still have a long way to go.
So thank you, Sheila. And what I want to back up just a little bit and talk to you about kind of how I came into this and where we began looking at it. Because in my experience in substance abuse and my experience in criminal justice, working in the halfway house and the Bureau of Prisons, some of the lessons that I learned were when we have multiple systems involved with people, when we have people who are receiving services from a mental health system and a substance abuse system and a criminal justice system, people fall through the cracks. And so for us to design a system that works for Champaign County, we wanted to look at what's being done elsewhere in the country in terms of the evidence-based models, in terms of where services are delivered, how they are delivered, and that's where Celeste did a tremendous amount of work. I couldn't have done it without her, so thank you for that. But it also needed to work for us in terms of our providers in Champaign County and how we deliver our services. We've got lots of moving parts, and we have a very complex system. So on your handout on page 2 is what's been identified as the intercepts in the criminal justice system. And the thought here is that people interface with the criminal justice system at various levels. It may be simply law enforcement. And if at all possible, we want to divert them at that point. If they need mental health services, if they need substance abuse services, if that interaction with law enforcement does not necessitate, from a public safety standpoint, incarceration, then what we want to do is link them with the services that they need. And we actually, in this community, have a large number of police officers that are trained in crisis response. And I've been fortunate enough to be involved in that training, and I can tell you it's very intensive, and they get a tremendous amount out of it in terms of understanding mental illness, understanding substance abuse, and how that manifests itself in behavior in such a way that they can intervene successfully. We want to augment that with increased crisis services from community elements, with Peter's help, so that police officers have another resource, which is the ability to reach out to a crisis worker to intervene. Again, we've made some progress in that, but as Sheila said, we still have a long way to go. We also can intervene after an arrest with diversion programs. People can go directly to a drug court or a mental health court or specialty court of some type. We need to continue to build those resources in our community so that we have that relationship between the judicial branch and the mental health and substance abuse treatment providers. Intercept 3 is the jail and courts. And what we've done is really focus intensely on services provided in the jail. And our program design, the models that we've chosen, are models that can be delivered in the jail and in the community. Because one of the things that, and the Federal Bureau of Prisons has done a tremendous amount of research, and what they've shown is that outcomes are much better when the models that are being used after incarceration are the same models that were used during incarceration. So when people are exposed to a treatment model, and we're going to talk about MRT in a few minutes, when they're exposed to a treatment model such as MRT, moral recognition therapy, when that service continues in the community, that helps to build that linkage and it closes that opportunity for disengagement. And going back to my years in substance abuse, one of the things that I do know is we're talking largely about a difficult population in many cases, difficult population to engage. Length of time in treatment is the best predictor of success. So if we can build a system that engages people meaningfully and keeps them involved, and I'm under no illusion that all of a sudden we're going to prevent reincarceration, but if we can maintain engagement throughout that, you know, if somebody is identified in the jail, links to a community provider, and maybe they end up back in jail again, but that community provider is right there to talk about what happened and maybe how we can prevent this the next time. So that's kind of the model that we're looking at trying to build. So that Intercept 3 is really important, and the jail needs to be linked with what's happening in the community. Intercept 4 is re-entry, and that's something that we've been talking about a lot in this community for quite a while, and it's an area that, quite frankly, we have a lot of work to do. When people return to our community from prison or from the jail, for that matter, when they're sentenced to the county jail, we do not necessarily have a robust set of services to offer them in terms of meaningful housing. One of the risk factors for reoffending is not having a stable environment, not having a support system, not having access to assistance with employment. So that's an area where we have a lot of work to do. So let me talk a little bit about, if you flip this over, on page 3, some of the evidence-based models. You've heard a lot about moral recognition therapy. That is a manualized program that a clinician can deliver. It's done in a group setting. However, it has a manual, and Sheila's got a copy of it there. It has a manual, a workbook that a client works through, and they keep that with them. It's been shown to be very effective with the criminal justice population and with people who also have a mental illness or substance abuse. So it was a natural choice for us to select for this. It focuses on confronting beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors. It encourages someone to assess their current relationships and what those relationships mean in terms of their behavior. It reinforces positive behaviors and habits. It encourages somebody to rethink their identity of who they are and where they've come from. It develops higher stages of moral reasoning. It encourages people to think in terms of morality and what it means to be a moral person. And again, like I said, it has been shown to be very effective. The second one, motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing is teaching a clinician, and it's something that we plan to teach the jail staff as well, basic motivational interviewing. The concept is very simple, but the application of it requires a great deal of artistry and skill. It is essentially meeting the person where they're at. So if you think about yourself, if somebody is trying to get you to change something about yourself, you experience that as a push, right? And what's your inclination when somebody's trying to push you? You push back. Our clients are no different. So what we often have done in terms of confrontation and reality-based, it's well-intended and it's the right intervention at the wrong time. That's the way I look at it. Motivational interviewing looks at what is the issue that you're facing right now? What's important to you? Let's talk about that. And now let's engage in a conversation about how we can move from this place to where you would like to be. So we plan to train all of our clinicians working in the system, and so that they can not only interact with clients meaningfully using motivational interviewing, but also to interact with each other about where they perceive the clients are, the inmates are. And we plan to give some basic training regarding this to the jail staff as well. A big part of this, and what Celeste is working on right now, is making sure, because this is what in the fancy dancy terms I call a multisystemic intervention, that the values and the work culture in the jail are supportive of what we're trying to do, that the values in the work culture in community elements are supportive of what we're trying to do, and Prairie Center and correctional health care. So a lot of our work is around trying to build that level of understanding with the people who are employed at the jail or at community elements. Seeking safety is another manualized model that we used, and we have a copy of that there. That we chose because it's very effective with substance abuse, and it's very effective for people who have experienced trauma. And we believe that there are a lot of people who have experienced trauma who are in the criminal justice system, and so that's a model that was appropriate for that population. We're not necessarily going to use all of these models with everyone. They'll be chosen based on the needs of the individual person. RAP, Peter talked a little bit about, and that is a recovery kind of self-help model. It's a very structured way that I think about what I need. Oops, sorry. I talk with my cans, I can't help it. The real value that we see with that is that people can identify what they need in a crisis situation ahead of time and put that down on paper or in a smartphone. And then that is available at the time of crisis so that we can deliver. And that's something that we can do with the sheriff's office, is say, one of the questions you ask people is, do they have a RAP plan? And if they don't know what a RAP plan is, then you move on. But if they have one, that's important information that we need to know. I talked a little bit about drug court and mental health, and the importance of having that coordinated effort, that integrated effort. That's really the key to making this work, is to get everyone who's involved on the same page. And specialized case management. So case managers who understand not just the mental health issues, but also the criminal justice system and can relate and talk to people within the criminal justice system. We have some challenges. Right now we're trying to implement the Affordable Care Act, and that's going to help us, I think, to a large extent, by providing Medicaid for a lot of people who have not been eligible for it in the past. And part of what we're trying to do is to make sure that we get people linked for benefits. But it will not necessarily pay for everything. As you all know, you need a lot of things that your health insurance provider won't necessarily cover. And so we need to think about how we can use what's available to us in terms of Medicaid reimbursement, but also make sure that we have the services that wrap around that make it all fit together, kind of the glue that makes it all fit together. We have system capacity issues in terms of in the state, in our state-operated facilities, locally in terms of psychiatry, accessibility to psychiatry. So there are system capacity issues that exist now that will not go away. Successful engagement, and I talked a lot about engagement, and to me that's the key to the whole thing, is successful engagement. But it can be difficult with this population. They're transient. They are here now, gone the next. They have their own support system that's outside of what we normally would have contact with them. So we need to work really hard to make sure that we maintain that level of engagement. Co-occurring disorders, and this is something that I've been working on for many, many years. When we have substance abuse and mental health problems that happen together, the solutions are not always easy. What we do know is that the more integrated those services, the more likely they are for success. So what we've tried to do is to choose models that we can use for both mental health and substance abuse. Seeking Safety is an example of that. Homelessness and housing resources, employment resources. It's very important that people have an opportunity to work meaningfully, and that being a part of our community, a contributing part of our community, is part of the solution that we offer to provide. So what works? I've talked a lot about it. A fluid system with consistent models. We've tried really hard to put that together. Evidence-based models that we know work, that have been tested and shown to work with the population that we're using them. Housing models are effective. Stable and supportive housing works. Incentives or mandates to participate in community-based services. That's part of what makes drug court work. The linkage between the court system and the service providers to reinforce the need to actively participate. Integrated systems with robust communication. And I cannot highlight that enough. We have to keep, and the support that we've gotten from Alan Jones has been tremendous, but we have to keep the jail staff working with community element staff, working with the contract mental health provider, working with Prairie Center, working with the psychiatrists in the community. Those service linkages are what's going to be the key, and that's what we're going to be looking at really closely, along with the data to support what we're doing, which is hopefully going to demonstrate that by providing these services, we can reduce recidivism. So the last thing that I have for you, and I've probably talked way too long already, but the last page is what we call a 4-quadrant model, which basically just looks at where we would provide a service depending on the level. So if a person has high mental health needs but low substance abuse, that they would receive services from community elements. If they have high substance abuse needs but low mental health needs, they're probably going to receive their services at Prairie Center, who's a primary substance abuse provider. So that just gives you an idea of how we're trying to think about assessing, screening, and where we're going to place people within this system. And with that, I will shut up. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Did either of you have anything to add before we take questions? No? All right. So would ask you, as usual, to keep your questions to questions and not comments, if possible, and to make your questions fairly brief so that the speakers will have time to answer. And if you want them to be addressed to a particular speaker, please do so. If it's appropriate for all three of them, then I'm sure they will answer. And I don't know how the cameras are going to work. Adrian, will you be able to move them to catch the speaker on camera, or should we just have them try to talk as loud as they can? I can move them. You can move? Yeah. Is that not a problem? Okay, all right. So move this mic towards the table. Oh, good idea. Because this is for the camera, right? This is the TV one. So this should pick all of you up and you don't have to worry about moving it. Right. So, question? Yes.
This is a question for Peter. You indicated that at that first meeting, there was obviously it galvanized you into action. What was the deficiency that was identified in our Champaign County system that made you decide that you needed to take action immediately?
That's, there's so many things, I don't know where to start. I mean, the bottom line is that we were not we were not connecting with people that were in the jail, that we were not getting them linked to services when they came out, and we were not doing any deflection. So, I mean, there were a lot of issues. And as I said, I think it was primarily because we were really more focused on the specialty courts and trying to support those, and we lost sight of that population.
Yes, Ms. Preston.
Is there a community in the United States that is doing this very well, that's sort of acknowledged by everybody, and what kind of effect has it had on the recidivism?
Bruce, you want to respond to that?
There's a number of
Can you
community.
repeat the question?
The question was, is there a community that in the United States is doing this especially well, and what has the effect been on the recidivism? So there's a number of communities and jurisdictions that have received planning grants through the Federal Department of Justice to begin to coordinate these. And I've read a number, and the approaches are different, and the size of the communities is different. I've not really been able to find a community that's comparable to Champaign-Urbana. In some cases, it's been entire states that have participated in that. But some of the studies that I looked at indicated that they have, through a combination of deflection and services like what we're talking about to try and reduce, that they've been able to reduce recidivism by 25 to 30%. I could do some more research on that and give you the names of some of those communities that have been published, and so we could follow up on that, absolutely.
I think Austin, Texas was one of the communities.
Austin, Texas is one of them, yes.
Is noted for doing a really good job.
Yes? Yes.
Thanks so much. That's very informative. I have several questions, but I limit it to one. The criminal justice gatekeepers have recently recommended had a recommendation to the county board not to fund basically pre-trial services, and they are even trying to speak with each single board member individually to convince them that this pre-trial services is not workable and it's not necessary and it's very costly. Based on a few weeks, like 5 weeks of a pilot program. So my question is, if county board decides to go along with the recommendation of these gatekeepers, how would that affect the kind of services that you are offering now and the services that you are planning to add? Because you said that you are just at the beginning and you want to just expand. So how would that impact your work?
Okay, first, would some of you summarize, one of you summarize that question for the TV, please?
Well, I think that the question has to do with that that people are trying to influence the county board to not deal with pretrial services. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
And these are the sheriff's office, the attorney's office, and the presiding court's office.
Mm-hmm.
Correction, maybe, or?
No, not a correction. I'd just like to point out that that's actually a separate aspect of what got passed by the county board, and I'm sure that they can address it.
That's what I'm asking, whether it's going to have any impact on the work they're doing.
I can at least make a comment about that from Community Elements' point of view. We would like to know more about why it would or would not work. We haven't had those discussions yet. So we have some of the same questions that you're posing, like how does, how did this pilot work? What did they find? But we'd like to be involved in more detail. And at this point, we haven't. But we have posed some questions. And I know that the Sheriff's Office has been busy, and so is our crisis team with everything happening with weather-related in terms of the emergencies in the last few days. So we intend to learn more, and we'll weigh in on that because it is an intercept model. It is piece of how we look at the continuum, and so we'd like to understand more and maybe look at what they've looked at and see if there's some alternatives. Probably just like mental health court. We sit up here talking about it, but we are very disappointed that we don't have a mental health court right now. And so that is, when I say we have a long way to go, there are some things that we've started and stopped that we need to revisit as soon as possible. And some things like mental health court, we've even gone a bit further because we won't let anyone who was in mental health court before not have that service. So we still provide the service until we have mental health court again, and that's really a driver for us too. So
I think if I could just follow up on that real briefly, I think that the important thing is that intercept, that there be something in place that intercepts people pre-trial, whether that needs to be the pre-trial program that was being piloted, and as Sheila said, we need to get more information about that, but something needs to be there. And what exactly that looks like is something that we'll have to work on as time goes on.
Gentleman in the back there.
We have over 1,000 drug cases a year. Drug court graduates maybe 20 a year. We have no housing for people coming out on parole. We have over 1,500 coming back each year off of parole. We have no mental health court. We have, like I said, no housing, no mental health court, and Prairie Center is underfunded and it can only accept maybe 30 people at a time. Now what?
well, I agree with you. No mental health court's a real problem. Lack of housing, which is why I talked a little bit about Time Center. Time Center is only one option, but of course, we don't have enough transitional housing for people who are coming back who need everything. And some people who've been away will need everything. Basic resources, housing, education perhaps, also jobs. And so those are the areas that we see are lacking. The community response is also limited. And so we're trying to work with a lot of others, but Community Elements is just one organization. So I agree with Chris. I mean, we do need a whole array of services, and any piece of the continuum that has tension, like there's no housing, every person that comes back, that's the first thing that's going to be the problem, and may actually affect them being perhaps even incarcerated again because of the lack of housing. And anecdotally, we have cases, and certainly I know the sheriff would talk about them, people that are committing crimes. Most common is trespassing, actually, and being picked up, and we don't have it. Our intercept model doesn't say, okay, you picked up now, avoiding going to jail, we have this place for you to go, when there's limitations about that. So, yes, I agree. I don't know. I wish I could solve it.
Well, I think that they indicated, Bruce talked about the capacity problem that we have in this state and the challenges. He mentioned housing and employment. I mean, we agree with you.
Yeah, I want to make it, I'm going to make a couple comments, but I'm not going to speak for 10 minutes. But first of all, one of the things is you said that this began in October of 2012, but I think actually the process of, and I certainly welcome these developments, but the process that got us to
to that point was a process of community response to the way in which the criminal justice system was operating, and in particular the surplus of people with mental health issues who are being incarcerated. Now, so I think there's a history as to why this is now on the agenda, and I think the participation of ordinary people from the community is an important part of that process. Now, from what I understand, and I'm sure that you're well aware of this, I mean, really the biggest problem with mental health in jails and prisons is that we have people who shouldn't be incarcerated being incarcerated. So while the treatment component is important, at the same time, I'm wondering what else are we going to do to keep the trespassers and so forth from being incarcerated? And I mean, one of the things that we were trying to get from Dr. Kalmanoff, which we never got, for example, and maybe you can give us the figures on this, and this is my question, is what is the profile of the people in the jail in terms of mental health, in terms of mental health? That is, how many people have mental health? How many people have dual diagnosis? What is the age? What is the age of that? What are the charges that these people have? What's the racial profile of people with mental health as compared to the general population? Because if the issue is, it seems to me one of the issues is to identify people that should not be in jail because they're committing crimes like trespassing and petty ordinance violations, which relate to their mental illness or their substance abuse. But if we had a bigger a more effective mental health system, they wouldn't be there in the first place. So I'm just trying to see how mental health engages with an activist kind of approach to changing criminal justice and decarceration.
Well, we know from both the national and state surveys, which you kind of have summarized there, and also what Alan Jones has said publicly a number of times, is that approximately half of the jail inmates have some kind of mental health or substance abuse problem, and that certainly is consistent with what we see nationally and across the state.
But I mean, is that the only profile that you have? I mean, do you cross-reference the profile of people so we know what, for example, what's the percentage of African Americans typically in the jail with mental health issues?
And part of what we're trying to do right now is to establish some of the mechanisms to collect meaningful data. Now, what I'm considering important and what you are considering important may not necessarily be the same thing, because what I'm looking at is what can we do to design more effective programs and to, get better outcomes for the systems that's the purpose of the data that I'm looking at trying to design. But certainly a year from now, we will have much more robust data than we have right now.
I just have one other thing to say about the data, which I think will show or demonstrate kind of the complexities. To be able to get to the data that you're talking about, community elements being just one piece of it, we have the data for the people we're working with and have been referred to us. But if you look at the last page of the handout that we had, and we did this so that you could kind of see it's more complex than just community elements is in the jail, because the way we have to communicate in the jail is a little bit different than how we would communicate within our own organization, because we have a lot of players. So correctional health care is in the jail, and they have a certain set of data and a certain set of information that they have on the people they're serving. We're in the jail, and then of course the jail staff have data. And so we have to kind of work through that. We're back in the jail. For those of you who historically knew, we were the provider in the jail and had access to that, and then we weren't, and now we're coming back in. But there is a lot of different players looking at the different pieces of data. We will be able to talk about the data that we have for the people we're serving, and then Celeste and Bruce are working to see how much of the data that is being created in the jail that can kind of help augment that. But there are complexities. And we're not sure at this point, I should also point out, I'm sorry for interrupting, but Correctional health care has no obligation to share any data with us.
So again, so
So-
that's what I was gonna ask. So those folks, they could have their data on the side and you have yours and those folks would not. be
One of the,
part-
yes, exactly. And one of the key elements for us is really, what we'll find helpful perhaps will be the data link data. And the data link data is really state data that we can cross-reference people at the jail with. And we'll learn a little bit more about, but there'll still be some limitations.
One of the, it's common knowledge that African Americans comprise 14% of the population in Champaign County, and they comprise more than 5 times that amount in the county jail. So to Bruce, this is my question. Are you familiar with the Surgeon General's report regarding mental health services to minorities?
Mhm.
Okay, so when I noticed on your evidence-based model, you don't address that at all. How services, and the report does an outstanding job of pointing out the importance of understanding the culture and the mores of your population.
Mhm.
So, as we look around, and it's not news to anybody, the people who receive the most of your services are rarely represented in your staff. So how do you address and deal with the issue of cultural competence, of issues of cultural differences? How does that work? Because it's,
Well,
you know,
I don't mean to cut you off, but
but that's, if you answer that, that will be sufficient.
okay. So, for example, RAP, which is a model that is largely based on an individual's natural support system and their own identification of who are important people in their lives that they feel like can help them in a crisis situation, builds on that natural community. So I would argue that, you know, those are the kinds of models that integrate cultural supports and support systems, community supports that exist and meet an individual where they're at. Motivational interviewing the same way in terms of trying to build on the needs of that individual and what they find meaningful and what they respond to. So a lot of the individualized, support-based, recovery-based models are culturally appropriate with a wide variety of cultures. But I certainly understand your point, and I hear what you're saying, absolutely.
But you didn't answer it. My question was not about the clients. My question is the staff and the people
And-
providing the services. Of course, the people who come to the table is going to bring their cultural mores and experiences.
Mhm.
The issues that the Surgeon General's report raised was that the service providers are unfamiliar with, and
The
to some
natural
degree,
support systems.
in my experience in Champaign County, are disinterested in knowing about and preparing themselves to address their lack of knowledge and information about the client population. My question was not about the people who receive the services.
Mhm.
My question is about your agency and the composition of people there and what training and background and how you and your staff and director and even the Champaign County Mental Health Board, which is another story that I won't talk about, has even attempted to provide to attain the necessary skill set to be effective with a population that is overrepresented in the system.
I can speak to the agency. we do have a cultural competency committee, and we do look at our staff in detail. And we also look at ways that we can improve it. So for the board and for the staff, we have to go through cultural competency training. But we also do that on a regular basis. We share it with the community. We have lunch and learns and do everything we can. So if there's other suggestions, our agency is open to hearing those at any time. But the Cultural Competency Committee started before the Cultural Competency Committee was required by our funders to do. And so we have a real interest and a desire to continue to improve in that. And probably we have a long way to go with that too. So I don't know if that answers your question. I just recently was looking at our statistics for last year, and I can't recall them, so I'm going to look them up while you guys ask other questions, and I'll try and share that with you as soon as I...
The Mental Health Board does require that every agency that we contract with, and this is in the contract, has to have a cultural competence plan. It's reviewed every year. We're actually one of the people that works with Access Initiative, Chandra Somerville, is the person who reviews the plans, and we're basically ratcheting it up every year, but it's a process, as you know. It isn't something that is just done.
Oh, I'm very much aware of that.
Anyone else before I go back? Mr. Gilbert.
This is more of an observation, but I remember when all of this started, the question was, should we build a new jail? And it's interesting to me is how this has shifted, and I think Dr. Kalmanoff was helpful in this, is that it's not the jail that's the issue, it's the system of services that which hopefully make jails only, it's not the solution that we see for many issues, but it becomes even a last resort, and even that needs to be remodeled so that it fits the needs of the population we're talking about. And I'm very, I have been a part of some of these negotiations, and I'm very proud of the Mental Health Board and community elements, and as well as the other agencies that serve us, and really coming out with this new direction of services. And I'm glad to see the jail hanging up in a hook somewhere.
Someone who hasn't, yeah, please.
So I'm sitting here tonight, and I knew that we were required to provide health care to the prisoners. I was not aware that the prison health care service also includes mental health care, but that actually concerns me because I know what the quality of medical care for most prisoners is, not good. And I shouldn't prejudge, but unfortunately I'm left with the unfortunate assumption that they're probably not getting very good mental health care either. And this may be a question that none of you can answer or would prefer not to answer, but of the money that Champaign County is devoting for prison health care, would it be useful to take that portion that pays for mental health services and instead transfer it to some community agencies who are here, who are going to be here when those folks get out of jail, and, you know, possibly bring some different programs in?
I think that's a question for the sheriff.
Yes.
3 questions. First one you probably can't answer, but when the presiding judge talks about remodeling the jail for mental health services, is he talking about isolation cells? My second question is building more isolation cells. My second question is housing mentally ill people in isolation cells a good idea? And thirdly, based on your answer to number 2, will you be making a recommendation or offering opposition to the county board to build more isolation cells? Thank you.
I actually have not heard anything about that. That would, at this point, our concern is more about the community-based services, not the services that are specifically under the sheriff's control and responsibility. So, you know, I don't really, and I haven't heard about that, so I don't know if you guys have an answer to that.
I do know what we've asked them for is it'd be nice to have some space for groups and for some individual work with people. And, but I haven't heard what other plans they have. So that's all I know. We have very limited space and it'd be really nice to offer some more groups there, so.
Do you know the effects on the mentally ill being housed for duration? Like they're using the downtown jail to segregate the mentally ill into isolation cells. What is the effect, based on the research and the evidence-based research, on the mentally ill being housed in isolation cells? Bruce?
Well, it's not that we can weigh in on what's going on there, because we really don't know. Our staff aren't working with people that are being treated for their mental health conditions unless they're being referred to community agencies or being moved out of the jail. So there's a certain limitation that we have to speak to that, but as far as clinically, there's lots of reasons to keep people safe. Isolation cells, by definition, could be a whole host range of things, and so I don't know if I can answer your question without saying, is it a safe place for somebody? Should they have lots of people there? I sure hope not. Seclusion in and of itself is a very monitored thing in a hospital setting. It has to be done very carefully, and it has to be done very limitedly. And so, again, I don't exactly know what their protocols are or how long someone would be in a safe room or what they consider seclusion. So, but yeah, there would be some concerns if it was for too long or if it's in a room that's not conducive to someone's safety or it caused more problems, then it helped.
And can I just ask a follow-up informational question? So the people that are overseeing whatever's happening with these mental health patients, is this
Correctional
entity?
healthcare companies,
healthcare
I believe.
Company that that the jail is contracted.
That they contract for to provide all of their medical services.
Maybe we should.
And actually, my question follows up on that, which is, I'm a little unclear as to whether you have currently any programs in the jail setting that are community-based through your agencies, or whether everything is this correctional.
Yeah, and I
services.
kind of neglected to go through this, which kind of
And that's on there,
outlines
okay.
that.
And then is there continuity, the continuity that you talked about, using the same model in the jails as well as for post-incarceration? Are they
Yes.
using the same model, behavioral models as you are?
Yes, MRT is being done by correctional healthcare companies, and correctional healthcare companies is the entity that is responsible for all medical services in the jail under contract from the sheriff. We have staff in the jail who are going through the data link and identifying people who may be requesting services or desiring services in an attempt to link to community-based services. So there are correctional healthcare people providing services in the jail, and we're also providing services in the jail. The MRT is being used by both. So that was one of the reasons that we chose that evidence-based model, because it could be consistently done by whoever the provider was. And we also do that in the community so that we can have that linkage.
So, but just to clarify again for myself, you are not providing any direct services within the jail. All of those services are being provided by correctional health care, and you are only doing the counseling and the things for people that are out of jail, is that correct?
I'm going to refer you just because I think it's getting confusing. So the chart on the very back of the handout, you'll see like a box. And the box actually describes what services we're providing in the jail. So intake referral, we're doing assessment and RAP planning, MRT, benefits case management, or referral for benefits, engagement, identification using data link, and then our case managers who are linking with people in the jail and then following them when they're outside the jail. Correctional health care is handling all medical and behavioral health concerns, including the psychiatric care, medications, any decisions about housing, that's all with correctional health care. So that's the interface, and maybe that's helpful.
I'm sorry, but I really find it a little bit disturbing that that mental health practitioners can't take a hard line on isolation in prisons. I'm sorry, but I've been incarcerated for 6.5 years, and I've seen what happens to people when they get isolated, and people with mental health issues who are isolated. And I know you can't be held responsible for what happens in the jail, but I think that the minute somebody suggests that we're going to isolate people in cells in a county jail, people who are mentally ill, we should be angry. We should say we cannot have that happening in our community. That's a human rights violation.
For trespassing?
I'm just saying that while I'm not asking you to take a position on what's happening in a jail, I just think that there has certainly been talk from the beginning of this whole process about expanding the mental health facilities in the jail, which obviously raises the question of what's going to happen in these expanded mental health facilities if that were to happen. And it would just seem to me that it would be absolutely essential, and I hope you will do this, as mental health practitioners, you will say we do not want people being held in isolation as a cure to mental health issues. I mean, it just seems to me like an absolute line in the sand that you really need to draw, and I hope you have drawn it in your head, and I'm just misreading the ambivalent answer.
Well, the ambivalence that I have is I don't know about that. I did not know that they have isolation cells, and I don't know the circumstances under which they use them, and I'll be happy to look into that when we talk. I mean, we're trying to work with the sheriff and his staff, and
I'm just talking about the use of isolation cells in prisons and jails nationally. This is not a big secret. I mean, this has been a battle that's been ongoing for years, and right here in Illinois, in TANS. I mean, so I just thought it was something that you should have some familiarity with as mental health practitioners, finding it abhorrent to be keeping people in isolation cells for 10 and 15 years.
I think maybe one more question of someone who hasn't asked. It's almost 8:30. Yes? All right. It's going to be short.
no guarantees.
Well, I'll try to make it as short as possible. I think it's just related to all of the questions here asked. It seems that there are decisions within the criminal justice system being made about what to do with people with mental health problems that does not at all involve people like you who are knowledgeable about all these issues. And also even the Board of Mental, I don't know what it's called, Board of Mental Health? Mental Health Board, even they don't know. And I think that, I guess you are running agencies and you have official responsibilities, but you are also community members. And I think that it is really important to know what is going on within the closed doors and try to make it more transparent what is going on, because you are involved. People are looking at you and asking you to provide the services, for like this section of the community, which are people who have committed violent or non-violent crimes. So we are, they are asking you to take on this big responsibility without having you having a say in this. And the same thing is with the citizenry, that they never want to include us in our discussions. And the gentleman talked about originally this whole issue about mental health being about jails. And the reason that the discussion shifted was because a community group actually made that happen. So it just didn't happen out of the blue. No more jail campaign has been working on shifting the discourse for the last 2 years. And I think it's, what I wanted to know is that whether you are willing to basically connect with the community in order to find solutions to our criminal justice system problems as far as mental health issues is concerned. I'm sorry I couldn't make it short.
No, you got to the answer.
Yes, we are willing to connect with the community. We're interested in what the community has to say. Our meetings are open and public. We identify priorities for funding. But the only thing I would tell you is that typically we don't fund high-end services like psychiatric hospitalization, or residential care. We are primarily focused on outpatient and community-based services. And as I said when we started this, our goal was to try to look at how can we make sure that anybody that gets in jail is linked to appropriate services when they leave, and to the extent possible, keep people out that that could be deflected if they have a mental illness, to get them to treatment as opposed to going to jail. And that's kind of where we are at this point. And I wish that the sheriff, or that Alan Jones was here tonight, because he could have probably answered some of these questions better than we can.
And the mental health board meets once a month?
Yeah, actually, we meet tomorrow.
Mental health board meets tomorrow at
4:30 at the Brookins building.
Brookins Building, 4:30 tomorrow. Good timing.
And actually, the focus of tomorrow's meeting, we're going to be talking about our juvenile evidence-based practice, which is called Parenting with Love and Limits, and we're going to have a report on that program.
But citizens can come and ask
Of course,
questions. And
citizens can come too.
the board doesn't know, the board should find out answers, hopefully, for you.
When is the December meeting?
December meeting?
December. I don't have my calendar with me. Do you know?
Is it like the third Wednesday or the fourth Wednesday of every month?
It's the Wednesday following the third Monday.
Wednesday following the third Monday.
If you go on our website, if you go on the county website, you'll see the meetings.
December 17th, is it?
December 17th.
No, that's wrong.
Yeah.
And so to the two
December 18th.
healthcare professionals, go ahead.
December 18th, and to answer the question a little bit, but probably not as sufficient maybe, is I was on the task force myself for a while, and I made the decision along with some of the staff and board at Community Elements that I could do more if I left the task force and started working on some best practice models, because it was going to take longer to start giving people services if I didn't. So that's how that shifted. And then with some support from the Mental Health Board, Bruce and Celeste joined that work. And our goal was really to do whatever we could for however many people we could within the jail system with what resources we had. And I'll also say it's no mistake that correctional health care is there, and we fully intend, Community Elements does, and maybe others in the community, if that contract were to go to an RFP process again, that we would again apply for it. We did before. We were successful for many years with it. We were unsuccessful back in 2004-05, and so correctional health care has been there, and so we would like to be more part of that. But at this point, it is a process of an RFP, and they have to weigh out which application is the best, which is the most affordable, and so that's sort of with the sheriff's office.
All right. Okay, thank you so much for coming.